Hey folks, welcome back to Soaring Profits. We're a little bit later than our usual start here on Thursday nights. We had a scheduled guest. Amy has been fantastic enough to kind of fill in for us here. Montana, who is, like I was telling you the last couple of days, is a small business owner, entrepreneur, mother of one, had to cancel last minute. Things come up in life. We understand that sort of thing. And for those tens of people that watch this, we figured that those things come a little bit before what we're doing here tonight. So we have a lovely young lady, Amy. James, if you want to do the intro, I think you and Amy know each other.
So Amy is a very good friend of mine. She quite recently just went back to university, and she majored in psychology. She minored in sociology. While doing that, she raised two wonderful gentlemen, and on her side time, she's a boxer. But she really, her passion, the conversations that we've had have been surrounding homelessness. And currently she works helping people who were homeless now have a place to live, and she helps them keep that place to live. So Amy, if you could just tell us a little bit about why you're passionate about homelessness, or why you enjoy the job that you're in.
Sure. So I'm very passionate about homelessness because I feel like there's a deeper story to what most people see from homelessness. And I kind of view that as my thing. Like I want to help people tell the story as to why they're homeless and also help them. I think that a lot of people have some prejudice when they look at homeless people, and yeah, it's just I've stumbled into that field, and I do feel pretty passionate about it.
Yeah, like I know, we talk about it a lot on Soaring Profits. We talk about it because homelessness is a big thing where we live. Like they've taken over our bus shelters, they've taken over parts of our parks and stuff like that, and it's a real issue because we're not handling it well. My position has always been mental health. That if we had a stronger mental health resources for people that didn't have an address, that we could help them to fit better into society and get where they need to move. Is that what you're finding too? Like, are you saying that it's like, so I know some people feel, oh, they just got to get up and get to work. Well, that's not the case. Like it's because they've been through either mental duress that has given them some sort of PTSD, or they suffer from mental health in a severe way. And until you solve that problem, you can't move forward.
Yeah, for sure. So with homelessness, I think it's kind of like you use the analogy of like an iceberg, right? So it's, so many people look at homelessness as, oh, there's someone who's homeless. He or she is on the street, but there's so many different layers and so many different factors that play into that. And I think what's happened is a lot of our society doesn't really realize the different layers and all the underlying factors. And 100%, it's pretty much always comes down to mental health and addictions, for sure.
Yeah. So what would you suggest, or what are you guys doing that is bridging that gap, either in a minor way or a major way?
So that's the huge issue, right? So like at different levels of government, there's not enough funding. Like it comes down to affordable housing and funding for mental health supports, addiction supports, and it's not adding up. I view it as like, so if like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So housing's like yeah, so it's like one of those big things, but there's so many other things being neglected that there's just it's the tip of the iceberg, but yet there's so much underneath that needs to be addressed that's not being addressed, for sure.
But what would you do if ideal world Pat gave you $500,000? It's not clearly enough, but say we're going to help one person. What would be that thing? What's going to bridge it?
Housing first. Always housing first. 100%.
Housing first.
because there's different. So if you think, if you're out on the street and you're worried about what you're going to eat or where you're going to sleep, are you really worried about not taking fentanyl? Are you really worried about making sure you get to your counselor's appointment? No, right? Like your concern is, am I going to have something to eat? Am I going to have somewhere to sleep? Am I going to be safe tonight? So if you can approach it from a housing first perspective, you can, if that person has a place to sleep, like a steady place to sleep, like a reliable place to sleep that they know they can count on, then maybe they can start to address some of the issues that led them to homelessness in the first place. But so many people are like, okay, well, you have to be clean. You can't be using any substances. That's a huge issue to overcome. And I'm a huge supporter of the fact that you can't possibly overcome that if you're worried about where you're going to sleep, if you're worried about what you're going to eat, right?
Right. That makes that. So that makes a lot of sense, but it is a big barrier for sure, because you're absolutely right. Even the sports that we have here, there are things like that. Like you can't show up high, you can't show up drunk, you can't show up disheveled. And if you have an episode in the warming room or the temporary housing, then you're banned for 5 days. But it's an episode. Like, so my theory on it, and I have not done the homeless work that you have done. Like, basically, we haven't talked about it, but basically, I talked to a lot of the homeless people in Peterborough just at random. It's not to help them. It's not anything. It's just if I see them in need or if I see them upset, I will stop and I'll talk to them and go, hey, what's going on? And a lot of the times they talk about how they had an episode in whatever temporary housing for us is a couple of, like, I think it's 24 hours. I don't think it's like what you were talking about where it's several days. And then they get banned because, they got upset. And most of them, the people that I've talked to are like, yeah, it was my fault. Like I screwed up, but it was because I was suffering. Right. And I always think that wouldn't it be better if we just paid one psychologist or one counselor or one person that could catch that could go, okay, no, I got this. You guys all go somewhere else and we're going to make this okay, because you can do that. It's very easy to do most times. There are, that 10% of times that the person is just too out of control or too on fentanyl or whatever it is, right? So, yeah, no, that's super interesting what you guys are doing. So your housing is like landlords, like, so Pat and I are both landlords. So is it that we come to you and go, you know what, I would be interested in housing an adult who's homeless? Is that how you do it, or is it?
No. So where I currently work, it's waitlist based, right? And so that's where, again, like I see 5 to 6 year waitlist. So there's where our homelessness comes into a huge problem, right? So it comes into like the government needs to fund more affordable housing, and like coming from also a perspective of we've housed people. So we have a program. It's called a by names list, and basically it's people who rank. There's certain scores on their homelessness risk factors, so they can take priority over a normal waitlist person. However, what we're seeing is like a phenomenal, way too high failure of these people coming off of homelessness into traditional housing. And traditional in the sense, like, yes, it's rent geared to income, but it's also, here's your apartment, go live, right? So where I feel strongly is the fact that you can't take someone out of homelessness, throw them into, even if it's affordable housing, that's not the issue for people who are facing homelessness. It's the transitional housing piece. And that's where, so the county that I work for is looking at making some more transitional housing, which is, I think, really hopeful. So the transitional housing is basically taking people who score high on their homelessness risk assessment, essentially, and bringing them into the fact that here's your house. Now let's work on the issues that are issues for your homelessness. So like if you're facing addictions, if you're, a lot of them are in the crowd of people who have been homeless for years, right? And that's a hard cycle to break. So it's, you've been homeless, and I've helped you. I've allowed you to sleep on my couch. So now you have a place to live. I'm going to sleep on your couch. But then that brings risks to their housing because, there's substance abuse, there's mental health issues. So transitional housing, I believe, is the key. And again, that comes from the whole housing first. The housing first, like here's your house, now let's work on all these issues.
Right. So the difference between what you're doing now and transitional housing is that the housing that you're doing now is here's your apartment, here's your key.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully you fill the fridge with food. And then the transitional housing that you're proposing or that is starting is there'll be someone there to go, okay, this is how we buy groceries. And this is how we make sure our house is clean. And this is how you get a bank card. And this is how you do all those things that we take for granted because we watched our parents do it. Like that's how we learned, right? Or our dad or mom took us there, right?
Yeah.
And they didn't have that because a lot of times they could be on the streets from 12 years old.
100%. Yeah. And that's like where the issues start, right? Because what's second nature to us isn't necessarily second nature. And this is again where like not only does the government need to step up on like affordable housing, but also we have a severe lack of wraparound supports for these people. So even if they get into transitional housing, it's not so simple as putting them in transitional housing. It's a matter of, okay, well, we need the mental health workers, we need the addiction workers, because homelessness comes from like it's not an overnight thing, right? Like it's years and years and years of this trauma and whatever has happened and has led to homelessness. And then they need intensive support. Like I've worked with people who have gotten housing. That's great. They're not living on the street anymore, but we don't have the mental health support or the addiction support or what we call wraparound support to support them in keeping that housing. So maybe our mental health association has enough funding to have a worker visit them once a week. It's not enough. They're 100% going to fail because they have all these people coming to their doors and saying like, I need a place to stay, I need a place to keep my drugs, et cetera, et cetera. So we need funding, or we need something that gets us more mental health workers, more addiction support workers, and they in turn can support the homeless population.
Well, so that we're 13 minutes into this and I haven't said anything, and that's that's a thing. Amy, you do fantastic work. There's no question. So I'm usually the asshole on this, and I kind of ask the devil on your shoulder type questions.
Mm-hmm.
And my first question I'm going to pose to you is why the government it's their responsibility to do these things.
That's a fair question. So the way I look at it is the government, and this is just my personal opinion, the government has stepped up to help people on Ontario Works. The government has stepped up to help people on disability programs. There's a whole population of people who are fully supported by the government for whatever reasons, whether it be physical disabilities, mental health disabilities. But then there's a whole population of people who are experiencing homelessness. And this is our population of people who it's gotten past, being on Ontario Works. Sure. It's gotten past being on disability. So somewhere there's been a failure, whether it's, and lots of people argue that it's the person's failure. Many other people will argue that it's society's failure. I think it can be a combination of both. I do think a lot of our programs, people fall between the cracks. So my argument is that if the government picks up the slack for these people who haven't fallen through the cracks, I feel like they should pick up the slack essentially on, you know, the people who have fallen through the cracks. And, you know, it helps them. It also helps the fact that we need well-paid jobs. Like, you know, we're kind of in a place where there's a lot of retail jobs, there's a lot of server type jobs, but let's put funding into jobs that actually can make a difference. And that's essentially, I guess, why I think the government needs to step up.
So in that situation, and again, I'm very, in a lot of ways, I'm very ignorant to the process of what you do and deal with on a daily basis. So as James said, we're both landlords. I've dealt with, you know, housing authorities in regards to tenants where, you know, they're falling behind on rent, they're going to be evicted, you know, they will go down and they'll get what appears to be, to the lay person, and again, ignorant of the entire process, as a free check from the housing authority in the area to keep their residency. And for myself, I'm pretty anti-government involvement on a lot of things. And one of the things is that if the government's going to be involved, what sort of measurables is out there, right? And that's where I think that in our community here, especially, we've had an opportunity to watch over the pandemic where we had what was I would say a normal community of our size homelessness issue that has turned into entire parks taken over by tent cities, a drug epidemic in our area that is killing literally every week. You've got somebody dying of overdoses. And as the guy, again, devil's advocate, if I got a tenant that's a little short on money, he's running down to the city to go get a check. And I go, like, personal responsibility. And you mentioned this, right? Personal responsibility. Where does that function in that assessment? That's a tough question. I understand that. That's a tough question.
It is, only because I'm not, as a private landlord, if your tenant is short on cash, I'm not entirely sure of any program that would cover that.
Don't tell my town that. So there's a program that if someone meets a requirement of a low income, then they can go and get an emergency check to pay for your
we definitely have something similar where I am, but it's a one-time thing. And it's like it's usually like, if you're a single person, it's usually maxes out at, say, $800 every 2 years. Or if you're a family, it maxes out at, like, I want to say, I think it was $1,500 every 2 years. So it is like a stopgap measure, but it's certainly, in where I live, it certainly isn't anything that someone could fall back on repeatedly. So now, that being said, I also know from my experience, like with my job, it is very hard to evict. I wouldn't want to be a private landlord. It's extremely hard to evict because of the landlord-tenant board. It's a very lengthy procedure. So even if we're looking at evicting someone where we are, it's like it can be a year.
Yeah,
it's very difficult. But that being said, it happens, right? And I just. Yeah,
that is part of the problem, is that landlords for a long period of time were pretty awful, and were evicting people for silly reasons and stuff like that. And if a small problem happened, or, you know, people were ruffling each other's feathers, they could just kick them out. So now it's kind of swung the other way, and now it's so stringent.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you convince a board to, and not to mention that COVID has made the waiting list so long that you're waiting a long time before you can evict someone.
So, James, I would argue you're bang on. And that's where I think that, you know, another governmental system to fix the governmental system that's not working with the governmental system that we have, right? So you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you've got a situation in which you have trouble finding tenancies for your at-risk individuals, because I, as a landlord, go, not a chance, because I'm never going to see the money ever again. And in this situation right now, where you know, housing shortages the way they are, I don't think you're going to have that problem for long. But housing shortages the way they are, you're in a situation where why would I take the chance on someone like this? So to me, this is more of a landlord-tenant bureau issue that is a housing problem than it is actually the willingness of landlords to get in and deal with it. So how do we? And obviously, none of us are landlord-tenant judges, but like get out of the way. This is where I talk about a lot is that free market economics have to come in at some point. Where if you have somebody in a robe that says you can't kick this person out because they've breached a contract for a year and a half during COVID. Holy shit, there was people that were just wildly deviant on, or not deviant, what's the word I'm looking for? Delinquent on their rents, right? So what do you do in those situations? You will never, ever put a high risk person ever again. Why would you?
See, that's where like I 100% like right now we're in a market that like as a landlord, you're laughing. You have 100% your choice of absolutely anybody you could want. You could be totally picky because that's where it all comes down to the fact that there's not enough housing even for middle class people, right? Like, but then you're like people and not even just low income people, but middle class income people, and I can speak from experience, are paying anywhere from 50 to 90% of their income on rent. And you should be only technically paying 30%, right? So that's where the whole affordable housing issue comes in. And that's where I think the government needs to step up, is the fact that they need to, and I'm not totally educated on the whole fact of how to build affordable housing, or like the whole fact of coming from a builder's perspective, like what makes it an incentive of building affordable housing. But there needs to be programs so that affordable housing can be built, so that people aren't spending 70% of their income on rent. It's ridiculous. And then you can get some of those people out of the risky, like there's an area of homelessness where maybe you're not technically homeless, but you're constantly always at risk of it. It's called at risk of homelessness, right? Like you're just on the borderline. And if there's more affordable housing options, people can get out of that bracket. And then it just is such a complicated issue because, there's funding of like, we need mental health workers. We need all this. It's just such a big, broad area.
So as a bleeding heart landlord, it's difficult for me because I've had people walk through my door and go, so I got off fentanyl 2 weeks ago and I have no place to go and nothing to do and I just need a chance. And there's a part of me that wants to say yes, but then there's the other part, like Pat says, but then I have that in my house. And that's going to bring, like he said, it's going to bring other people, like his friends, his social group, his everything could walk through that door, and then he slips and falls, and next thing I know, he's doing fentanyl in my house. And I just can't take that risk. That's not who I am. I have never lived that lifestyle. I don't even know what that lifestyle looks like, and I don't want to. So when that stuff happens, I feel awful. And I've called Pat and went, I don't know what to do with this. And he's like, yeah, you do. Don't rent to them. I'm like, yeah, but they just need a hand up. And he's like, don't rent them. That's the answer. And he's not wrong, because then I am the one, like, because I know I would be the one getting him groceries and I'd be the one, it's just kind of a thing. So it's hard when you're a landlord, and it's very easy to say, like we had a whole podcast on this about that landlords are gouging, but all of our prices have gone up too. Like the cost to pay for the heat, the cost to pay for the gas, the cost to pay for the roof that I had to put on the first year that I started renting. I had to do a main drain to the road. Like there's all these like costs that no one else thinks about that all come into rents. And then mortgages are going up now. Like what is it at 5% now?
Higher. Yeah.
Yeah. So all of that becomes a factor in the other side of things. Like it's not necessarily always that us landlords are gouging people. Sometimes it is. There are people out there that I've seen like on Kijiji and stuff, and I went, I can't believe you're asking that for that room, And then there's other times where I'm like, you'll put an ad on Kijiji and you'll get attacked. Like I've been verbally attacked on Kijiji because I'm a slumlord. And then I've talked to Pat about it because that's my sounding board about this stuff. And it really bothers me because I don't think I have a very nice place. I keep it up. I cut the grass. I do planting. I keep it clean. I literally scrub the shower and everything. So I get what you're saying, that we have to kind of figure out this rent control thing. But on the other hand, we also, if you want landlords to take the risk, like I want to buy another house here. For me to buy another house, I have to be able to pay for it. I have to be able to, because when I walk like this house, it cost me $20,000 to get it ready to rent. I hadn't got a dime, nothing. Hadn't got a cent. I hadn't borrowed any money. It was all on blood, sweat, and tears. 20,000. No one's giving me a dime, and so it took me like a year or two to recoup that. So I just think it's great to say that landlords should have lesser rent, and you guys are spending 70% of your income and stuff. But I work 2 full-time jobs, so I don't have to deal with that. Like I think sometimes it is personal choice.
I don't even think it's that landlords should charge less. See, I think there's 2 separate issues, right? Like there's people experiencing homelessness, and that's a whole other issue of a whole other host of factors. And then there's there's the market of rent, and there's the market of course, like mortgages, and you have to make a living. That's a whole other low to middle class income. But that's 2 separate issues for sure.
Right. Yeah. But to say the government should try to find a way to build, if you look at dorms, like at schools, they're specifically designed to have the basic needs. And you could build that on a large scale in an area, and it would be low income rent already. Like if you didn't charge what schools charge to live in these little places, if you charge what they're really worth, it would already be more affordable. And then if you added a subsidy from the government, and a subsidy from the government would only help, because then they'll have less, police involvement, they'll have less ambulance involvement, they'll have more resources right there, and it will cost them less on the back end.
Do you want it in your neighborhood? Like we could build one up by you, James. Do you want it in your backyard?
Yeah. Why not?
No, but that's my point here. I think is that at the end of the day, you're dealing with a segment of society. And again, I'm the asshole. I wear it well. I'm okay with it. You're dealing with a segment of society that in and of itself alienates themselves from society in daily choices, right? And when we're in a situation where we talk about affordable housing, first of all, there's a massive liability take that the landlords take on for it. So if you build what James is talking about, first of all, you got to go to the community and go, hey man, we're going to build this in your backyard. And the neighborhood goes, you just dropped my property values by $150,000. And I don't think my taxes will likely reflect that. So that, there's so many underlying dynamics that go into just like the real estate side of this, let alone like the human. Like at the end of the day, I'm a firm believer that if we solve a lot of financial problems, the human problems come along with them. Like a question I would pose to both of you is, so I would argue my tactile observation of this is that homelessness is at an epidemic proportion. I've never seen it like this.
It is really bad.
I would ask you, what did we do 10 years ago, 30 years ago, and 50 years ago in these situations? And I would argue that all of these programs weren't there in the formats they are now. And how do the programs that we're building right now benefit in a cost? And again, I go back to the financial side of this, and like a cost benefit analysis, right? There used to be like charity. There's an old saying, charity starts at home. And, that's maybe not a popular thing to say in 2022, but there's a bit of a rationale behind that, is that how somebody paying 70 or 80% of their income for their housing, problematic. I don't know how anybody could do that. But if you're just depending on Ontario Works, And I know that there's situations where that's abused. I'm not saying all of it are, but if there's enough money for a case of beer in the fridge, or enough money for fentanyl, or enough money for those things, and I think these are things that people talk about their dinner tables at home when we talk about these problems. What, looking back historically, I would argue potentially we handled homelessness very differently. And was it effective?
So the difference, I think, is the fact that, like, homelessness, first of all, to the extent it exists now, didn't exist because for a host of reasons. First of all, I believe, well, the economy has changed, housing prices have changed, everything has changed, and part of what you said is the fact that, like, you know, like, okay, so fentanyl, is it an issue in a household? Generally not. Fentanyl becomes an issue. So I kind of feel like we're kind of talking about two different issues, right? The fact that, like, the lower income households and affordable housing, or people actually experiencing homelessness, because
Sure, that's fair.
Right, there's two completely different issues in the sense that
So Amy, if I can interject while you're there. So you used the terminology there, people experiencing homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
Is that like a terminology for what everyone else would just call the homeless?
Yes, because it's no different. So I've caught myself other times saying homeless people, but it technically, to me, is a better way of saying people experiencing homelessness. It's I think, a more, shall we say, politically correct term. Don't roll your eyes.
So I'm very anti-political correctness in so many facets, because I think it's gotten out of hand, right? We've gone too far to crazy town. And that's where I think that, the use of that, and I'm not saying you're wrong in using that. That's a terminology that, you didn't coin. That's something that you guys use in that profession. But it's like it's happening to them, that there's complete unaccountability to the whole situation. And that's where I'm trying to get back to, is where, like, that personal accountability, again, like I said earlier, I'm a very big believer in very small government, right? Anytime the government gets involved with anything, I'm of the notion that they pretty much fuck it up. And that's where I'm saying is that from a historical point of view, and yes, you're absolutely right, I can see where there's a dichotomy between the two issues that we were talking about there. But when the government gets into the business of providing residences for people, I feel like the opportunity for abuse is the wrong term, because I don't think anyone's like, hey, this is a lifestyle that I'm wanting to live, per se. But there's a lot of people that live right on that fringe where it's like, what's my incentive to better myself? Whereas if I work this much, my check, like, do you get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm not that.
You and I have had this argument so many times.
No, and that's fine, and we'll have it again tonight, apparently. So
yeah, we're gonna have it right now. So, like, if out of 10 people, 9 or like 5 of those people get a foot up because they got a residence, then that's a win. I don't care about the other 5 people, nor should you. The whole point is you're catching people.
And this is my favorite topic, is of personal accountability, because, okay, so I have a quote.
Amy, get him.
What?
Get him, Amy.
Well, okay, so it's sort of a quote, and it's basically like, we're all in the same storm, okay? It's the storm of life, if you want to say.
Okay.
But we all have different boats. So you might have been given a yacht, right? I might have been given a canoe, and someone might have been like, nope, you don't have a boat at all. So start swimming, right? And so I feel like a lot of people want to say, oh, you know what? He should have been accountable for his life. But are they saying it from a perspective of they were given a yacht and that person was not given a boat at all, right? Like, people aren't given a fair chance, a fair life. We know that. Lots of people are given a hard life, a hard chance at life, everything, right? Like the trauma, like I've worked with people on the streets, and the trauma some of them have undergone would absolutely 100% blow the mind of anybody, right? Like, and I just feel like people, I guess all I wish for is people would approach it from the perspective that like you may see it as the fact that like, well, why wouldn't he just get a job, just work, just I worked hard, I survived, right? But maybe you had family support, maybe you had strong mental health, maybe you had that to fall back on, whereas that person didn't have family, was prone to mental health issues, was given schizophrenia, was given bipolar, right? Major depressive like disorder. There's so many different boats. Like I know it sounds corny, but so many different boats people can be given. It's the fact that nobody, maybe they weren't actually given a fair chance. And what I hate is the fact like I live in a very conservative area, and people don't want to see people experiencing homelessness. So they, they'll say like, "Oh, I hate the fact that someone is cold in the winter, but like I saw them there in the vestibule of the bank trying to keep warm, and I called the cops because, they're disturbing me." Right? And it's just like, okay, well, where do you want them to go? What do you want them to do? How do you want to help them? Like I do feel like being born in Canada, where we are, like we're pretty fortunate, so why not help people how we can? And I'm not saying everybody is in the position to help people. I can't financially help people usually, but I can work as my job to try and help people. I will, when I can, buy $5 Tim Hortons gift cards, and I'll carry them around, and here's $5. It's not a lot for Tim Hortons, but hey, it's something.
Amy, I advocate 100% for what you do, and what you do is fantastic work. Anything that I say, I'm not. There's no at any point am I targeting you, and I think you know that.
Okay.
My struggle 100% is that I think that the government system comes in and fails because of all of the other government systems and that we've implemented. The point that I was going to earlier about the historical side of this, and it doesn't really matter the religious connotations that go along with this, is that the community through church, through organizations 50 years ago were the ones that were reaching out and helping the poor, right? And as a community, as a society, I argue that a lot of that community essence has been lost. And now we call on the vestibule and say, "Hey, officer, go pick that guy up and get him out of my way." And I think that a lot of those historical issues that arise from that, where I am my brother's keeper, if you will, and the organizations and institutions that were 50 years ago, like I say, we just didn't see homelessness. Whereas I see now, homelessness to me, as a landlord, is almost a cottage industry, and that sounds terrible, but I'm in the ability to constantly keep my properties tenanted for whatever I want to charge, because there's always a lower demographic that's going to drive pricing up. So in that concept, until we get the government money out of it, and I know that's totally counterintuitive to probably what a lot of people think this way, we need to fund more. I argue get the government funding out of it completely, 100%. Go back to, if you want to be a charitable human, go solve that problem. I don't know what that looks like entirety, but the more and more and more and more money we throw at this, I don't see tangible solutions. It seems like it just keeps the duck on the water.
I think we're just going about it the right way. Like, I think the government sometimes has good intentions, but they don't seek the people who know the problem. Quite often, in a lot of the jobs that I do, lofty people will come down and go, "You're going to do this now," and I will be like, "Well, how will that help the problem? It's not anywhere near the problem. It's not surrounding the problem. But okay, you're paying me to do it, and we're wasting our time." If they came to me and said, "Okay, what is the problem? What do you need for the problem? What are the things that you need?" and we sat down and went, well, this is what we need. These are the things that we need. We need these things. I think that you would find better systems. But no, what they do is they hire advocates and boards, and they pay them millions of dollars to come up with these grandiose plans that have nothing to do with what we need.
Well, James, I would argue you just argued my point for me and validated what I'm saying, is that's government bureaucracy. So when you have Helen that comes down and says, James, caseworker, X, Y, and Z is the new policy and protocol that we're going to go there, and James, the caseworker, goes, okay, right? Then she gets paid, the board gets paid, all of the members of the board gets paid. Why are we doing that?
See, I would like, my thing is that I think the government needs to maybe, I don't entirely agree with some of their Ontario Works and their Ontario Disability funding. I do, from my employment, see an issue with some of the funding there, and that there's a lot of potential for abuse. Right. 100%. So I don't criticize the programs in the fact that I do think they help some people. I think they definitely have a place. I know, like, the government program of subsidized daycare saved me as a young single mom because I wanted to work. I didn't want to be on any sort of social assistance, but if I didn't have subsidized daycare, there would have been no point in me working, right?
Right, so, exactly.
Yeah, so I think there's value in the government programs, but I think there needs to be maybe more stringent guidelines, and then somehow some of that, and again, I'm not super educated on government budgets and stuff like that, but like redirected to instead what I think is more appropriate with transitional housing, housing first programs, affordable housing programs, to get the higher risk people into affordable housing.
If you were to take, and again, a devil's advocate, if you were to take the government completely out of the picture, government funding is gone tomorrow, we snap and it's all gone, okay? What would that look like?
Wow. A lot of jobs have we got.
But like, how would the homeless be helped? What would pick up the slack of that? Do you think they would? Do you think that the prison system would just be more fuller? Or do you think that the community, because that's what he's suggesting, is the community will wrap around it, the churches, the people will see that the government's not helping, and they'll go out and they'll do more advocacy and start like warming rooms in themselves?
No, like, well, a lot of like the prison system, that's tied into government funding. Like, it's all tied into it. And the fact that, unfortunately, I think it's the way society has gone. I think it's worse with COVID, 100%. But like, a lot of people, it has polarized some people, but at the same time, like, a lot of people are just, look out for yourself, look out for your own, which I get to a certain degree, but ideally, sure. Like, it used to be more of a church community and they'd look out for each other. I don't think that's the way our society is right now. Not to say the government fixes everything, but in our country, it is a support. 100% it is, right? Like, there's other countries that don't have that and they have zero support. Our government funds tons of jobs that in some way helps people experiencing homelessness or low income families. Is it enough? No, but it's there. It's definitely there.
And without it, there's a lot of people that have stepped up, moved forward, done some great things, and haven't just stayed on low income. Like, that's what people don't see. They only see the people that are still on low income, that still, have subsidized housing, that are like drinking out front, the 6-pack or whatever. They don't see the people that are like going to work every day, doing 2 or 3 jobs and trying to better their children's futures and getting out of there. and moving on to something better. They don't see it because those people are too busy to be seen. So they
Exactly.
only see the other side of it.
Exactly. And I guess that's where my thing is, right? Like I was that person. I was working 2 or 3 jobs. I was definitely considered low income, but nobody would have known it because I was working. My kids had everything they needed, but I I guess my wish is that people would see all of the aspects of homelessness. My pet peeve is the fact that you walk around my town and everybody just says like, "Oh, he's lazy. He doesn't want to work. He's addicted to drugs. It's 100% his fault." There is partly personal blame, of course. We all make our personal choices. I guess my message to people is just that try and realize maybe that they've come from, like I said, different, same storm, different boat, right? Like they've come from a completely different background. There might be battling things that you yourself never could even imagine. So I just wish where I live, it's just a matter of, it's always like, no, it's their fault, it's their fault. But I don't think it's that simple. I just want people to approach homelessness from a perspective of it's not that simple. There's a million different factors. There's a million different ways we can help. If people are falling into the river, don't just pick them up downstream. Let's go upstream and kind of figure out why they're falling in.
That's a
She
great
has
analogy.
the
I
best
like
analogies.
That's a great analogy. So we're kind of the opposite. We have a very liberal mayor, and pre-COVID, we were kind of a welcoming place for homelessness. So we had what was a large tent city. So she put up porta potties. She did a donation thing, and all of this was great. But then, unfortunately, people inside that community started like partying all night, and they were leaving needles, and they were robbing, and they were stealing, and they were causing crime. So then they ended up moving them, but with no real idea of what to do after that. So now we have transient from that, because when we welcomed them, we had them coming from all around us, like all the small towns. We had police bringing, like, putting them on buses and sending them up here, because it was a little bit better of a life here because people were like for it and stuff. So we're more of a liberal town right now, but I'm finding as we go on now, we're past COVID, we're starting to open up again, but we still have this huge homeless problem, and they're everywhere. They've taken over parks, they've taken over bus shelters. You cannot walk from your car to anywhere without someone asking you for money. Every corner, like every crossroad in our city has someone asking for money. There's also like little, like it's kind of like Oliver. Do you know the music Oliver? Where there's the whole network. There are now networks of homeless kind of entrepreneurs making money, and you can see it because you watch it go down. Like in different communities, you can see how like they'll collect bottles and then they'll take it all to this one guy, and that guy will collect them, give them the money, and then just small things like that. So what's happening is we're flipping now. We're starting to get annoyed with it. We're starting to not like the fact that I can't take, well, not my kid, but people talk about, I can't take my kid to the beach because now there's needles in the water, even though we have proper needle things there. I can't go to the beautiful park that we built right downtown along the waterfront because it is filled with people that are not making good choices. Mm-hmm. So that's the difficulty that we're facing now, because people are they only see that top of the iceberg. They're not seeing these people are actually struggling because it doesn't look like they are. It absolutely 100% doesn't look like they are, because it looks like they're just partying. And I get that. So when I talk to them, in most cases, it's because, mental health or something wrong, something has happened to them. But then there's another factor. There have been a few people that I've talked to that were kicked out. And then the trauma of the streets have changed them in such a way that they cannot function because they have suffered that PTSD, because they're constantly in fear of their stuff being stolen, or someone hurting them, or someone forcing them to do something they don't want to do, or not being able to sleep because they're worried that someone's going to like beat them up or steal their stuff. Like there's all that stuff too. I don't know what my point is. I'm just talking. But so we're on the other side. You said you're a conservative and that's all they say. Not you, but your city. We're flipping that way. Even though we're a very liberal town, we have a university and a college, and we seem to be more liberal. It's because of what we're seeing, and we're not hearing that other side of the story, that people are starting to say, you know what, we need to change this. And I've noticed that I don't know when they do it, but there'll be like little cities and then they're gone the next day. No one talks about it. That used to be a huge news story here. Like if one tent was taken.
Yeah, so we have an epidemic of violent crime in this community. Like we have a downtown business right now that's a kind of a designer fashion-ish store, and they currently have a presentation in their front window of like a volleyball score counter where you've got like the cards that flip, like the 2 sets, and it's days since we've been broke into, and I think it's at like 4.
So, and I think, let's look at the reason why, and it all ties together, and there's absolutely zero easy fix, but I think it all ties into the fact of, why do people commit crime? It's usually because they have an addiction of some sort, right? So they're looking for money for their next hit, and that ties into homelessness, that ties into mental health. And so my challenge to people when they're telling me like, oh, I saw this tent city, or I saw this, and it makes me super uncomfortable, these needles and these people, like, okay, so I have 2 challenges for you. 1, talk to the person. Generally speaking, they're not dangerous. I'm not saying, like middle of the night by yourself downtown, wherever.
Yeah. After a day of drinking.
No. But generally speaking, talk to them. They're human. You will realize it, and it will help you at least humanize them, right? Because a lot of these people get dehumanized. And then also, okay, so you have an issue with the way your city is with these people, right? Talk to your government. Talk to whoever, your MP, just talk to them, because if enough people say, this is an issue, I don't know, maybe I am way too hopeful, but like, if enough people talk to them, you have to elect your MP, your MPP based on the fact of, okay, so where do you stand on fixing this issue? So talk to the people who are the people that you see on the street. Talk to your local government representative and figure it out, right? Like, it all comes down to the fact that we're all human. These people weren't born thinking, you know what, I'd really like to be addicted to fentanyl, and I think I'd really like to be homeless. And the way that like I look at it is, and it always helps me, even like even in the work I'm at, like sometimes I see people and I'm like, wow, that's crazy. But like, that's someone's kid. That's someone's, maybe their brother, maybe their sister. So it just take away the dehumanization, I think, would help a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree with you. Like, so being able to talk to, I think it's easier because I'm a large male. I talk about that a lot, that it's easier for me because there are some times where I'm like, whoa, I maybe shouldn't have talked to you because it can be dangerous. You're absolutely right. You gotta really know your proximity. You have to understand. Sometimes you have to understand mental health a little bit more than you think to talk to these people. But other times, like if you pick the people that aren't upset, like there's a gentleman that I talk to quite often, and his problem is he talks very freely about how he has mental health, and he's good sometimes and he's not good other times. So then his life starts getting together, and he starts getting everything together and all his ducks in a row. He has a place to live, he starts working, and then it all falls apart on him because he can't handle it. And then he's back on the street with a sign. And he struggles with it because there is no help. Like, because if he goes for mental health, no one's paying for it. Counseling, you're $163 for an hour, right? How are you going to pay for that when you can't afford it? If you do have some sort of episode and you go to the hospital, their only answer is to hold you for 24 hours. And then they go, okay, we want you to go see a counselor. Great, but who am I going to see? Like, the waiting list for a counselor is years if you can't afford a counselor, right? It's great for me because I, can afford it, so I'll get one quick, but someone like him can't. And then there's other people that I've talked to that definitely bipolar or schizophrenia, and they wouldn't even be able to seek help even if they knew they could seek help. They have no idea. They don't know something's wrong when I talk to them. All they know is that the reason that they're on the street or the reason that they were kicked out is because of whatever thing that they've created or their mind has created. And that is kind of an impossible issue if you don't have the proper help. And that's why I think we need to be more on the ground floor. We need boots on the ground. I talk about it all the time. Our government agencies like social work and homeless work, and I don't know what they're all called, are all so top heavy. If we had people on the ground walking around and actually helping these people, like, why couldn't we have a counselor that walks around and goes up to Billy and goes, hey, Billy, how's it going? What's going on today? What did you eat today? What's going on? And have a counseling session for free. But the problems we solve for that?
Yeah. And that's, I think when I say, we live in Canada, I want the government to step, that's partly or a large part of where I think funding needs to step up. Not just affordable housing, but funding the paychecks of people who can do that, right? So that's exactly what we need. It's like, this is not based on any scientific research, but working with people experiencing homelessness, a very large part of them, it's schizophrenia, 100%. Yeah. There's controversy as to whether drug use causes schizophrenia or schizophrenia causes drug use. Regardless, the two very, very like co-occurring, and the fact that like people who do have schizophrenia, their options for therapeutic drug use they're awful. Like, if you ever look into it, it's basically a choice of, do I want to be a zombie or do I want to use meth to control my symptoms, right? So there's a prime example of where let's step up mental health funding, let's step up addiction funding for these workers, like you said, boots on the ground. We always say that at work as well. Just getting out there and saying, you know what, here's your counselor, here's this, because it's very true. They won't engage on their own. I will admit that 100%. They will not engage on their own. I see it every day.
I don't think not in all cases, but there are definitely 60% of the cases. And that's I don't deal with as many homeless people as you do. It's like maybe 2 or 3 people a week I talk to. Like, it's not very often. It's not like I'm making it sound way bigger than it is. It's not. But the majority of the times they don't even know that there's a problem. Mm-hmm. They have no idea that there's a problem. And how do you get help when you don't know there's a problem? You have 4 flat tires on your car, but you think that it's because there's a bird sitting on top of your hood. And that's the problem. I got to get rid of the bird. But dude, you have 4 flat tires. No, it's the bird. The bird's on my roof, Mm-hmm. So if someone was there, though, and could, and had the skills, which I do not have, I think that we could solve some problems. And, I get the whole idea of housing, and you need a house first. And like Pat talks about that all the time, especially that pyramid that you're talking about, which I can't think of the name of it right now. Pat leans into that a lot, and he's absolutely right. Like, so we're talking about recession a lot lately, and the fact that during a recession, you have to pull back because you need that basic need. Like, all of us now, like, we're all going to be narrowed down to basic need. We're all going to be like, I have to pay my rent, I have to pay my food. And so these other resources that we're, I'm not going to give money to the homeless person maybe, and I'm not going to go buy a car, and I'm not going to do that because I need to cover my basic needs first. So I get that they don't have their basic needs covered, but I also feel that, and I think it's a large majority of the cases, is that I don't know that would help if they don't get the psychological help they need, because you will not feel safe anywhere if you suffer mentally in the state that they suffer in, even if you're in a home, because you're trapped in your mind to believe things that aren't true. So even if you're in a home, that problem still exists. And if no one's helping you, having a home is not going to get that basic need met. You're not going to feel safe. You're not going to feel like you're housed. You're not going to feel fed. You just don't feel that way.
And that's why
panic mode.
Housing doesn't work, right? That's why transitional housing is the key, because then you're with intensive wraparound supports. Because you're right. It's totally failed. Here's a house. There you go.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't work. And I'm
just going to pause for a second, because we've had a whole conversation about homelessness and paying for this by the government paying for it and paying for it with taxes. And this one here is only talked twice. And this is so unusual. He must either really like you or
very much so.
I don't know. I don't know what's going on here, but
no, I love that you guys are having this conversation. I'm just kind of bird on the window, if you will. I disagree adamantly about so much of this, but I also respect where you guys are coming from. I just think that it's a fundamentally heart first mentality that you guys are taking in a situation that, like the housing scenario, I go back to, we had institutions in this country, right? So we had institutions in where people were psychiatric assessment centers and institutions, and the government disbanded them because of liability.
Yep.
Again, I go back to the government being so problematic in this whole process that if we can figure out, and this is, Amy, I absolutely, I don't at any point do I want you to like take anything that I say, but if there's anything that you can take from this conversation is that, what if we think outside the box, and instead of funding everything, because I hate that shit, like it boils my blood, and it's not because I'm inhuman, it's the fact that it ain't working. So in business, in my personal life and things like that, I look at things and I do what's called a cost benefit analysis. If there's no ROI, which is your return on investment, then break it, blow it up, find something else, right? And we walked away from the institution models because of abuse. There was all kinds of things that were going on, but it was, I would argue, more so liability on the government's perspective, because they were putting people, institutionalizing people against what was the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that is our Constitution in Canada here, Constitution in the United States, Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, and they were infringing on these things. And this goes back to like life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in the United States. We have very similar in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Everything you guys have talked about, and I respect you both, you're lovely people, but you're implying our own ideologies onto a group of people that have rejected them. They've fundamentally rejected the ideologies in which we're trying to get them to establish within the community and society. So what do you do then with an understanding that this is a problem, societal problem? What do we do? Do you go pendulum swing, right? So now we're giving money to everybody and we're paying for everything for the government, from the government to the people. That's not working. So when does the pendulum start to swing back and going, okay, well, we have to keep our community safe for the others. These catch and release police programs that are out there right now, whether it be due to mental health, whether it be a hospital, like that was the other answer, right? The hospital was a catch, again, government hospital. I just see an ongoing trend with my logic line here, right? So that's what I'm saying is that if we can break that, if we can separate out of that mold, that's where I'd be very interested in having the conversation around when you break that and it falls. Because I promise you, I would argue that over the next 10 years, you folks are going to go through massive budget restraints. And the reason it is because you're not going to have the fiscal budgets that you think you do now, that nobody thinks is enough. You're going to get hit way worse when GDP starts to fall, which is all the profiteers that follow us, is the gross domestic product. If you're not doing well economically, you don't have tax revenue. If you don't have tax revenue, you don't have revenue to be able to give to these social programs. These social programs then crumble and fall to the wayside. And then what happens? And that's where I would like to see more of a plan, is that for long-term plan. And I know nobody has the answers here. Like this is bullshit, magic wands and craziness that we're going through right now, right?
Well, you and I are. Amy kind of knows what she's talking.
She's doing what she's talking about. Yeah,
exactly. She's actually doing it.
Once this blows up, because the old system blew up, right? The old system of institutions blew up. I bet you they never thought it would blow up. And here we are. We blew it up. So how could we blow it up?
See, okay. And I have to argue with one.
Hit me, baby. I love it.
Yeah, that's what we want.
You say about the institutionalization and how it, they quit it. I wholeheartedly disagree with that. They quit it because it didn't work. But that being said, and then also the fact that, yes, we're approaching it from, I think you said, a heart-centered ideology, but that's where my argument comes from, is the fact that, like, okay, so institutionally speaking, it didn't work. And that came from a whole absolutely not heart-centered. That was, people who were experiencing these issues were not people. So that was the other extreme. So, and totally, maybe it's completely, not realistic, but we are all human, and we all, I don't think approaching it from a heart-centered ideology is a bad thing. I think actually, in fact, that's what we need more of, because then I can totally see where you're coming from, Patrick, in the sense that you're like, oh my God. But like,
no. And I value what you're saying. And like I said when we started this, Amy, is that the work you do is amazing work. I disagree with the implementation of what your organization does. The work you do with your clients is God's work, right? Like, you're touching people's lives every day. However, I struggle with the box you play in.
Yeah. And it's such a hard area. It's a gray area. It's 100% a gray area. And there's so many different levels of it, but I just can't help but be optimistic of the fact that if we can get more people to view it in that heart-centered ideology of the fact that, these aren't problems to fix. Like, what I'm saying is the people aren't problems to fix. Yes, they have problems to fix, but it could happen to you. It could happen to your son. It could happen to anyone. And yes, throwing more money at it won't necessarily fix the issue, but we are.
I'm glad we agree.
But we are, let's face it, we are fortunate in the fact we live where we live. We have the option of the government throwing money at some things. So let's try and figure out where they should throw money at, I guess.
Yeah, no, I completely agree that we should take more control on how we spend our money than it just seems that, like I said, they make these great programs that aren't written by the people that are doing the work. And that is always the case. It is always the case over and over again. Every time I get a program or something that I'm supposed to do, I'm like, so who did you ask? Well, I asked 5 people that just got out of university that are in your field. Well, they know a lot of stuff that they learned, but unless you're walking in the field, you don't know the real problems. There's a lot of problems that you run into, that you see, that you feel, that you touch, that won't factor in, and so they miss it. And one of them is, like you said, that whole like idea. I would never have thought of it. So I've always been pushed mental health, but I would never have thought that having a home first would be the way to go. But you've been on the ground and you know that, right? For me, I think mental health is the way to go. If we had a better mental health system, I think we're both right. I think that you're right in the fact that we need a better housing system. But I think it's a better housing system, like you said, the transitional housing, where there is all of those mental health catches, because you would catch them. You would be able to help them in a safe spot where they didn't have to be afraid, and they could learn that they're not afraid. You know, they don't have to be afraid, that they can lock their door and that their stuff is safe, and that they don't have to bring in One-Eyed Jack into the house. You know, you don't have to. You don't owe that person anything. You know, that person, like, let's look at your history with One-Eyed Jack. I just made up that name. Let's say Bill. That's a nicer name.
Really?
And see, that's the problem with
That's a little fun. I'm trying to make the profiteers laugh. But then you can break it down for them and say, you know, okay, let's look at your history with them. Like, what did they bring to your table? How do they benefit you? How do they help you? Do you really owe them? You know, you could catch all that, but you can't catch all that unless you have the proper people, the boots on the ground to help.
Dying inside.
Do it.
Dying inside.
Why? Why are you dying inside, Patrick?
The reason why housing is the issue is that it gets it off the streets and out of the community eye. Right? Yeah. So if you disagree? Mm-hmm. So if you have a housing problem and you have a tent city, you're going to have phone calls and demanding your head as a mayor.
Oh, I see what you're saying. You're saying that the government sees the problem that way.
Right. So that's why we're going to focus on housing, because these people have problems. They are their own problems to fix. The government is not benevolent in this magic wand that they want to fix these problems for people. Right. There is an entire, like I said earlier, there's a cottage industry. There's millions and millions of dollars spent on salaries every year that come back in tax revenue for the government to do this. So by housing first, right, you're getting that problem off of the visual entity of the 95% of the society that would be like, what's going on?
But that's, again, where I think that's where you have to draw the line between affordable housing and supportive housing, right? Because yes, if you just build a whole crap ton of affordable housing units, there you go, get in your apartment, it's going to fail, but yes, it will get people out of the view of people who find it offensive.
Right.
But don't do that. Let's do supportive housing, because then yes, you'll get people out of the view, but also you'll actually hopefully fix the issue for at least some of them.
Okay, I agree with that. It does two things. It
Mm-hmm.
does what you're saying, which is it gets them off the streets, but it also appeases you and I, because the government's doing something. You know, like if the government came in which some governments have, Toronto I think has done it recently, where they just go in and the cops go in and they like kick them out physically, rip down their tents, you know, all that stuff, then you and I get upset about that. Mm-hmm. But if they say, here's a card, go see this person, you have a home now, and they disappear because of that, then you and I can go, oh, well, that's good. That's solved. Problem solved, you know? So it is I see what Pat's saying. It solves that problem, and then I don't have to pay a psychologist.
In every country, in every nationality, in every generation, you have had the ghetto, right? Mm-hmm. And for lack of a better terminology, that is where these people will end up in some form or less. That's where I'm saying is that
it's not true.
I think it's just that
if you create low-income housing, you don't have doctors living next to it, do you? Do you want that? Like I said, James, do you want it next to you?
I would argue that a doctor could live there because he gets the adequate help that he needs, adequate food he needs, and has a mom who works 2 jobs and wants.
I mean next to it.
What do you mean?
Okay, so when you build these housing area.
But if we do it the way that Amy's suggesting, where we have the structures in place where they have psychologists and they have helpers and they have workers and they have all the structure to teach them how to transition, then yeah, I have no problem with that.
But you don't have the money for it. So you don't have the money for that. Now they've been telling you you don't have the money for that for 50 years. Mm-hmm. So now what do we do? And that's what I'm saying is that to me, the box that we're playing in.
But my argument is that if you did that, you would save money. Because you wouldn't be putting the stress on the police systems. You wouldn't be putting the stress on the hospital systems. You wouldn't be putting stress on all the robberies, the drug crime that's coming in that we have to police. All of that would go away because you're catching it on the front lines, up the river, as Amy likes to say.
And that's kind of where I'm going with it, is the fact that you're going to be spending money on these mental health workers, these addiction workers in these transitional housing units, but you're also going to be spending less at the hospital with paramedics, with first responders. Like, you're going to be spending less on these emergency measures because, like James said, you're catching it in one spot and you're hopefully mitigating those effects, right?
Or if the government doesn't get involved in it whatsoever, they don't interact with those first responders in the same way.
I just don't think our society, the government not being involved at all, is even realistic, right?
But that's my point. So we're in a position right now where I argue quite often is that we're going to a two-tier healthcare system and have been for the last 25 years. And like it or lump it, you're in the process right now of going through the painful portion of it. So I would argue that in the next 10 years, you are going to have a two-tier system where you will have a private and a public payer system that will likely be rolled out. I think Ford will probably take a crack at it, and maybe even this term if he gets another one. But that's where you're at. So the reason that is that efficiency has to come into a factor at some point. And that's kind of where my argument always boils down to, is what is your ROI? What is your return on investment? So if you're understaffing hospitals because you have an epidemic of homelessness and it's just a revolving door. So they go in and sit for 12 hours and then they get out and then they're back for another 12 hours and they get out and then they're back for 12 hours. You can't staff for that. So don't. Does that make sense?
But we're saying staff it at the source.
Sorry?
Staff it so that you are there. Like, so at the point of impact, when there's an emergency, when you have a mental break, when you have all of these things going on, it is a window of opportunity to make change, but it is also hard to reach someone who has like schizophrenia or any of those really severe mental traumas. But if you can catch them when things are good, you can often do change too, because people who suffer from this and they're having a good, they're going through the good stage of it. They want change. They don't want to experience that, what happened. So that's the time that you can catch them and give them help. And if you have them at the point where they are in a house that you're helping them with, and you come and see them every week and go, hey, how's it going, John? What's going on today? And go, well, you know what? I'm having a really good day. I was thinking about, going and trying this. Oh, you know what? That's a really good idea. We can support you. We can help you. We can, these are the things we can help you with. Or there's no one there for them and they go out and on the way to what they were hoping to do, they run into someone and it doesn't work out.
So you're rebuilding an institutional model with an open door.
Correct. Assisted living is not institutional.
But that's failed,
right? Is locked doors. So institutional is locked doors, with the power being that we were trying to hide them away. They used metal prods, they tied them down, they gave medications without consent.
That was just your experience.
That was my experience. They did experiments without consent.
Liability.
Execution, everything. They did all of that without consent.
Right.
This would be with consent, because you'd have to have consent in order to do it, but you'd be there to help.
So how do you get? Sorry, go ahead.
Go, Amy.
I just don't think you can compare past institutions to what we're talking about in, say, transitional housing. It's like, it's not even, I don't think it's comparable at all.
So I argue you can, because they're both fundamental platforms that are being provided by a higher authority, an institution that is driving this process, right? So whether you are a psychiatric outpatient like we've had for 100 years in this country, or you're in transitional housing, or you're all of these processes that we've had, the institution, and I'm going to push back on something you said a little bit earlier, Amy, is about the liability aspect, right? When all of those things that James talked about, when they were occurring, and they were occurring on governmental land by governmental employees, the liability was through the roof, okay? So when you have that situation, now what they're doing is they're removing liability and they're pushing it out into the community, and they're saying landlords are going to deal with it, right? You're going to have a relationship with that tenant, and landlords are going, I'm not renting to you. So again, this is a governmental process that is failing, arguably, to solve a solution by creating kind of like what I was getting back to there originally, is that if you have a block building that has people coming and going, that they live there, they're being medicated there, they're being handled and dealt with there. I would argue if we used a grade 6 definition of a mental institution in the institutional lifestyle in the years gone by, it's not that far removed.
A mental institution was a prison. This is not a prison.
Oh, okay, so my terminology is slightly off. But we had in our community here, we had the Hutchinson wing.
So like a traditional mental institution would have been, you were involuntarily put in there.
Right.
You had zero say in your treatment, in your medication, and it was not up to you whether or not you left. If we're comparing that to transitional housing in the sense that I'm talking about, this is a completely voluntary program. It's more of a program, like, sure, it has 4 walls, it has a door, but like and
it has counselors.
It's a program, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like, okay, you want housing, so here's your program, you can come live here, you have to engage in mental health supports. If you have substance abuse issues, you have to engage in counseling to do with this. These are your kind of your guidelines. If you don't follow through, you'll leave. If you want to leave, go ahead and leave. I just have a hard time. Sure, maybe it's run by the government in this sense that way, but like I don't feel like I can compare it to previous institutions.
So the reason why I come back to that is because you're demanding adherence for a benefit. Right?
Yeah. No, so that's where the Housing First comes in. So the difference between, say, like, there's different programs that say, like, okay, we'll give you housing if you're clean for 3 months, right? That's demanding adherence. Housing First programs don't demand adherence. So, you know what? Oh, okay, I can't say they don't demand adherence, because sure, we're saying you have to engage with mental health supports, but we're not saying, like, if someone's like, oh, I'm clean, oh, I'm not clean, oh, I'm clean, oh, I'm not clean, like that's okay, right? So they're not, the difference between, say, rehab, right, is the fact that you have to come here, you have to be clean, right, and we'll support you. These places, Housing First, no, it doesn't matter if you're clean or not. We'll give you housing. You need to engage, but we're not demanding sobriety.
You're not banned because of your trauma or your symptoms of trauma. You're banned because you don't want to seek the help that will help you with that.
Yeah, so there's always those people, and I don't have a problem admitting it. Some people will always be homeless.
Yeah.
For whatever reason. They've lived that way their whole life. They want to live that way.
Yeah.
But the majority of people don't want to be, and those are the people that we, if you can get them in transitional housing, hopefully you can help.
Well, I think Amy's absolutely right, and everything she has said was brilliant and wonderful. And I haven't heard barely anything that Pat said that was even coherent, let alone right.
Most, yeah, even coherent speech, really. English language.
Yeah, English is hard for him, and it's that time of the podcast where I probably should cut it off. Amy, you are delightful and wonderful, and the stuff that you know about homelessness is mind bending, and I'm so happy that you jumped in here. Like, folks, like, you gotta, like, she came in. I told her 4 hours ago that I wanted her and I needed her, and she was like, "Yeah, that's not something I like doing." And I'm like, you know what? Pat and I will bring you in. It'll be fine. We'll have a great conversation. And she said, yeah. And I appreciate her that she came. And, for no preparation, not even knowing what we do, I think you did an amazing job. And I'm very happy you came. Thank you very much for that.
Well, thanks for listening to my rants.
No, Amy, I agree 100%. You handled it like a champ. Sometimes we're not so super easy to deal with and going there, but you can tell. And like I said earlier, is that the stuff you do on a daily basis and touching the people's lives that you do, it's fantastic work. And everything that we talked about tonight, I might have pushed back on some of the platforms and profiles and that sort of thing, but there absolutely is such a huge need in our communities. And like I told you earlier, and all the profiteers that watch us later will obviously know, but I talk a lot about the economic conditions that sometimes lead to these problems. And I argue that we are going to be in a position where it's not going to get good for a long time. I think we're going to go into something deep and dark and nasty. And I appreciate that there's people like you that have maybe a little more heart than I do at times. And I think it's a fantastic skill set that you bring to the table. And I wish you nothing but the best success with your clientele. And again, thank you for doing what you do tonight. Now, there's a little piece that we always do at the end of these. So I got a tagline. Okay. So my tagline, we'll go through it here in a second. James has got a little tagline. And then we always put our Thursday night guest on the hot seat. So you got to come up, you got to do a little sign off or something. All right.
Yeah.
So for all of you,
kind of saying that you like to say,
just something, words of wisdom, right? So for all of you out there that have been watching tonight, thank you so much. Those of you that will be following and watching tomorrow, like, subscribe, and share. Obviously, we're trying to bring some interesting folks on. Amy was fantastic this evening and came in on a moment's notice for us. So again, thank you, Amy. I appreciate it. Like always, it's Patrick. Let's make some money together, folks.
James, let's heal our minds, bodies, and souls together.
And Amy,
love your neighbor.
I love it.